Welcome everyone in the room and to people watching on the webcast to the Streets, Environment and Home Scrutiny Subcommittee. Just like to remind council members, officers and members of the public who are here that are asked to leave the meeting if you wish to make or receive a telephone call. If you plan to refer to a specific page in the report or the appendix, please use the pack page number on the bottom right hand of the page rather than report page number. This will help ensure that everyone finds the correct page quickly. Just as noted previously, we are being webcast, so this is being filmed for live and subsequent broadcast via the Council's internet site. Generally, the public seating area isn't filmed. However, entering the room, you are consenting to being filmed and to use of those images and sound recordings being used for the purposes described. Members are reminded that the webcasting system uses a signal from the microphone systems, so please ensure that your microphone is switched on and off, and especially off when you finish speaking. I don't think there's going to be a fire alarm, but someone seems to have added that to the list, which is new, that we have to leave the room if the fire alarm goes off. Okay, so on to item 1, which is apologies for absence.
Apologies have been received from Councillor Mike Selva and Councillor Oliver Lewis is substituting.
I've also received for lateness from Councillor Mann. There are quite a lot of problems with, I believe, the trains coming out of London Bridge. So he's running late. I've asked him for an estimated time. He's going to hopefully text me back sometime soon. So item 2, which is the minutes of the last meeting. They can be found on pack page 1 of the agenda. Just asking whether people, any comments, or can we agree them? I take that as that we can agree them. Item 3, disclosure of interests. The committee needs only disclose any interests that do not appear on their annual register of interests. If required at any point during the meeting, forms can be obtained from the Members' Services Manager. I should really introduce that we have a new Member Services Manager today. And you may want to introduce yourself, Victoria.
Hello, I'm Victoria Lara and I'm new support officer for this committee. So, hello.
And new to the organisation?
Yes, new to the organisation this month. So.
Item 4, which is urgent business.
There's no urgent business today, Chair.
Item 5, exempt items. There isn't any Part B items today, so we don't need to confirm the allocations, but I'm sure if for some reason we need to do that, we'll move the relevant standing order. So that brings us to the highlight of the evening. I'm sorry, Colm and Leonard, but it's the Cabinet Member for Homes, Regeneration and Planning. It's the question time. So welcome, Alison. I understand that you may have a short presentation for us. So for the members watching on the web, we'll go over to the presentation that will appear on your screen.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for having us here today. This, as we just said, Homes, Regeneration and Planning, it's a wide-ranging portfolio, so I've tried to touch on many issues briefly this evening. But at the heart of that portfolio is delivering affordable homes and in ensuring that Croydon is also a great place to live and work and play through its regeneration and development. And there's another thread that I think runs through the portfolio, and in fact the Council, in a borough where there is such huge regeneration, which we're going to touch on this evening, is ensuring that nobody gets left behind. And by that we mean that homes and jobs and education for Croydon people are really at the centre of what we want to deliver. So some of the key parts of this portfolio, some I'll touch on in more detail, and I know some have been scrutinised individually by this committee before and will be in the future. And also we've got separate papers this evening on brick by brick and housing allocations. So brick by brick and housing allocations obviously come under this portfolio, as does the growth zone, the regeneration and development of our district centres and our metropolitan centre, planning, which of course includes the local plan and spatial planning, our council housing stock, housing allocations, the housing revenue account, our tenants and the tenancy services, private sector housing standards and enforcement, which includes our landlord licensing services, the delivery of temporary accommodation, and also a strategic overview of our gateway services. And we hope to go through with you this evening some of our successes, our priorities for the future, and some of the pressures and some of the ways that we're going to be dealing with that. So, looking firstly at our highlights and successes, and I'll try to go through this as promptly as possible, but there's a lot to talk about. So, the progress on the local plan we're pleased with the way that's going. Last winter's consultation saw over 8,000 people respond, and that's helped our planners shape the plan to its proposed submission stage. And so from Monday the 5th of September, which has gone to Monday the 17th of October, residents can make their final comments on the proposed submission, and the council's publicised that, and information regarding that has gone out. All responses will be sent then to the Planning Inspectorate rather than the council to be considered as part of the public examination of the plan. And the final plan that we're sending off to the Inspectorate will go before the full council this winter. The growth zone has been endorsed by the government and awarded £7 million of revenue grant, and this has been approved by Cabinet, and Cabinet saw the paper with the full details on that. Obviously, brick by brick that we're going to be talking about, and the council's delivering 50% of affordable housing on this programme, and also our commitment to mixed communities. South Norwood Public Realm in the regeneration has been brought forward, and we're shortly going to be launching 3 pop-up shops in Portland Road to help the economy there. The Place Review panel under the Planning Department concept was launched with excellent responses by potential panellists, and the formal launch of that panel will be later this year. And the panel will consist of professionals with expertise in planning, landscape design, conservation, culture, urban design, architecture, engineering and placemaking. And this will give the council independent advice to elevate the quality of new developments coming through across the borough, and will actually give us the opportunity to actively work with developers at the earliest possible stage. Thornton Heath regeneration under the New Homes Bonus Package continues, and that's working with businesses and the community, and also setting a standard for the council to take forward on community participation. We're in extensive pre-app discussions with CLP for a revised Whitgift application, and that's progressing. A lot of work has been done around reducing the number of households in temporary accommodation, and in October 2015 we were at 3,265, and we've now got that down to 2,625 at the end of August. And that also results in a reduction in the net cost of temporary accommodation for council. And as part of this, we've held 2 successful temporary accommodation housing solution events, inviting our tenants and residents in. And we've managed to not only convert 200 temporary accommodation properties to permanent tenancies, but also brought in an additional 100,000 in rental income that was owed to the council. We've received a New London Architecture Award for the Council's redevelopment of the Fairfield Halls and College Green, and that was awarded for the work in the conservation and retrofit category. As many of you will know, National Trust came to Croydon and held a huge event, the Edge City event, which celebrated Croydon's architecture that we've already got, and gave people a good opportunity to look round the borough and appreciate some of the things that may not have been so obvious. We're progressing on the site of Ashburton Park, the old convent, with open bidding for businesses or social enterprises wanting to take on the running of the former convent. and we're working on exciting plans for the restoration of that building to make it an exciting place to be, which will include adding an outer extension, providing flexible room space for community events and installing new toilets for all the park users. New Addington Pool has gone to planning, has been given planning permission, and work's going ahead on that exciting leisure and community facility. We've been working on new estate clean-ups with Don't Mess with Croydon, and that's around actually working with our residents for them to take pride and help improve the areas that we live in. Box Park will be opening shortly, and as we know, there will be a festival event to actually take that forward. The Gateway Service, Croydon's Council's initiative that's helped thousands of people at risk of homelessness, has been named as one of the 3 winners ahead of an awards ceremony celebrating the best projects for homelessness in London. And it's quite unusual for a council actually to be leading in that area, so we're quite proud of the work that's been going on there. And so far the scheme has helped more than 1,000 families avoid homelessness and 5,400 people to become more financially independent. And we've also helped get 587 people into employment. And last, to just touch on this, is Taberner House. The council has exchanged the sale of a 250-year lease of Taberner House land to Hub Residential Limited, and that went to Cabinet and was done in August 2016. And Hub will be taking on the full delivery responsibility of 500 units, a residential scheme which will include 30% affordable housing, alongside 13,000 square feet of commercial space and major improvements, which means including an increased amount of open space for Queen's Gardens. And the council on that scheme will own and manage the affordable rental units, which will be provided for the people off of our housing waiting list. Touching on our priorities, clearly getting the Croydon local plan through, because it is about so much more than people just think about planning. It's about how the borough can thrive and actually grow to meet the increases in demands. It details how many homes the borough needs, how the infrastructure such as roads, schools, medical facilities need to change, and what jobs and employment opportunities are required to support local communities in each of the borough's 16 places. And the plan's very much been based on a local plan that starts at your front door and then works up to your local area, your district centres, the town centres. So looking at it very much from our residents' perspectives. The growth zone remains a priority to be delivered. Obviously, there's 39 key projects there, and we've recently had the appointment of a growth zone director to ensure that that gets pushed through, and a multidisciplinary consultancy to drive forward delivery. We're looking at working across the council, both in place and people, making sure our services are more joined up, and delivered with residents at the heart of them. So rather than starting with the services and the departments, starting with residents' needs and working back the other way. Clearly, a priority is to increase the supply of affordable accommodation and also help move people to less expensive forms of temporary accommodation than those that we're currently being forced to use, and decent homes in the private rented sector and, of course, in our own housing stock. Going on to some of the pressures and challenges, the retention and recruitment of high-quality staff at all levels in the council, and particularly in the planning department, in regeneration under my portfolio, in housing, that really is a bit of a challenge at the moment, not only for Croydon but across London. So we're assisting that by a retention and recruitment package in the development management area. There's, of course, we know, continued pressure on department and service budgets as a consequence of austerity. So we're looking at efficient ways to deliver new services, and particularly through upgraded IT and the generation of fee incomes where it's thought necessary. We've also got to manage the increased expectations from residents and businesses in a changing London, and I think there's two sides of that. A lot of people are expecting more from London, but we've also got concern at the implications of a growth in changing London, that lots of people, as London spreads out, as Croydon becomes bigger, as more people come to live here, and the regeneration, there's a lot of concerns that people understandably have that their communities, and we know that our boroughs always change, but people from communities do have concerns about that. So there's issues around more engagement with the public and also with developers coming through there. But I think at the heart of that would be the growth zone delivery, culture, jobs and education. Other challenges that you touch on is, of course, and we've had this before, and it was in my last report, is around the Housing and Planning Act and the implications for that for the council. And I'm very pleased to actually see our local MP, Gavin Barwell, now seems to be talking about a change of emphasis on tenure, and I think that's a really important message coming out. The 1% rent cut to our housing revenue account still has a huge effect, and we're trying to balance that out. And we also don't have some assurances about whether that will just be over a 4-year term, whether that will continue or finish. The freeze on local housing allowance rates and the impact of that in the private rented sector. So that's about, as rents go up in the borough, whether people who are on lower incomes are going to be able to afford to pay them. The continuing problem that's been year on about other boroughs placing their families in Croydon in our temporary accommodation, and equally the issues that we have when we are then forced to place people outside of the borough. The extension of universal credit is a big issue. The benefits cap, again, which is coming in shortly at a lower cap, are both huge issues for the council. And so the number of people that we've actually got claiming universal credit that are now going into arrears because of the 7-week initial universal credit assessment period is quite an issue for the council. And the rising cost, really, of whether it's home ownership or rented is an issue for the council. Thanks. Just touching on the Neighbourhood Planning and Infrastructure Bill, because that's the next bill coming through that will affect my portfolio. Since the bill was announced in May, the infrastructure element has been dropped, but the government are now progressing in the Neighbourhood Planning Bill to include detail on neighbourhood planning, planning conditions and compulsory purchase orders. And while we welcome several things in the bill, there are some concerns around the bill's aim to speed up and simplify neighbourhood planning and indeed the planning conditions, that they only be used when strictly necessary. And whereas we would support that, we are concerned that that's actually taking away a loss of accountability, local accountability that was previously there. And also, of course, resources. If I just touch on this one, the kind of planning pressures within the planning department, we currently have 1,170 planning applications on hand in the system, which have been generally rising over the last 6 to 8 months. So at the end of last year, we were running at about 903. We're now at 1,170. 65 of those current applications are classed as major applications, and the rest would be classed as different types of minor applications. And just to put that in perspective, in the last year, the council has made 4,639 planning decisions. The local plan, and really that's just to go through, I've touched that on earlier, and you'll see up on the screen just the dates of how we're continuing on that. Housing maintenance contracts. I haven't gone deeply into this because I'm aware that this is something that you call to scrutiny on a regular basis, and we've been into quite detail. So what I've touched on here is some of the work that we've actually been done with Axis and under responsive repairs, and actually bringing forward opportunities for Croydon residents. So you'll see there that some of the opportunities around apprenticeships and work placements that have come forward. And they've also been involved in the refurbishment of Whitehorse Road playing ground, and approximately 3,000 of funding provided for ad hoc community events for our tenants. Thank you. Right to buy, again, just kind of touching on the rates of right to buy, and you'll see that they fell dramatically when the terms were changed, but again are increasing at quite a level. So 135 right-to-buys were completions in 2015-16. And while we're here, I'll just touch on rent arrears. Now, we've got there a rent arrears collection at 98.2, and that was the last time the statistics were collated. But we're actually having problems keeping that, and that's around the issues that I've touched on with the universal credit, where the payment is now going directly to tenants rather than directly to the council. And the universal credit is coming on board in Croydon, so not everybody's on it. But at the moment of our tenants, we have 667 tenants on universal credit, 538 which are now in arrears, with a total of £498,000 worth of arrears that need to come into the council. And that's because of the way the payments are made, and also because the payments aren't coming in so efficiently. That's also had a huge impact on our emergency accommodation. The number of cases on universal credit there are 315, and we now have a total arrears of 1.2 million on rent money that should have been coming and would have come in efficiently to the council in the past. And our normally efficient collection rate of 90% for those cases is now in the region of 60%. So you can see what a huge issue that is. This slide just touches on the landlord licensing scheme, and I know that's something that will also be coming back to those committees. But that tells you about the number of completed applications, the number of prevention of homeless cases through that scheme, and also the improvement notices that are served. And I think that that's an essential message. Because what we want to be doing is not taking people to in court, but encouraging landlords to improve their properties. And most of them are coming round. The inspections are being done, notices are being served, and the properties are being improved. And the landlord licensing scheme has also made it much easier for our enforcement officers on the street to make touch with landlords and ensuring that they've got the kind of correct refuse collection, which has lessened the amount of fly tipping and so on in some cases. And just very briefly to touch on the empty properties, in 2015 we launched a further campaign, and since then we've brought 108 flats and 29 houses back into use for Croydon families needing homes. So that's been a successful campaign. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison, for that extensive update. Just looking at page 11, 12 and 13, I think we can confirm that you do have the longest list of areas of responsibility of all the cabinet members. So when people are asking questions, there is you can refer to those two areas that Alison should be able to answer, but it's not a test as such. So what I'm looking for, who would like to answer the first set of questions? Donald.
Thank you very much for that thoughtful presentation. And may I say, first of all, that the subject is not an issue of division between the sides. We're all committed to promoting the best possible housing solutions that we can. Your brief is extensive, very extensive indeed. I just have a couple of questions. That you mentioned improving housing standards, and I'd like to know, perhaps by a note, what that actually means, because we continually see the reduction in the size of accommodation being constructed and offered to people. It's particularly difficult when you have families, nowhere for people to have any privacy, for children to do their work. So that's a very important issue. The other thing is that you responsible for providing the sites to brick by brick, and I accept...
Donald, any brick by brick questions should come under brick by brick later on.
Well,
Because she's going to be, Alison's going to be
can
here
I
for
make
that
the
as well.
point? I make the point. I don't really want to be told when we come to brick by brick that really it's a housing matter, because brick by brick, they don't pick the sites. They're given the sites, or suggested sites. And therefore, I think that, and I understand how you produced a list. Your officers just looked around and saw what there was and put them on a list. However, that would imply that you're open to suggestions. And one of the suggestions I have is Montpellier Road site in Purley. Now, that site, you're proposing to put 3 blocks on community space that was provided when the previous blocks were built for the children and along. It's not totally unacceptable. And I wonder whether, in fact, you were prepared to come to Purley and come to Montpellier Road and meet residents and have a discussion about it. I extend that invitation, and I'd like you to accept. And then the other thing is that you're proposing to have travellers at the back of the recycling centre. That is another issue that is very, very contentious, and I think that ought to be looked at again, and invite you to participate in the discussions concerning this site. All in all, I feel that the task that you're confronted with is mammoth, and I think the officers are working hard. I noticed that the apprentices that you're looking at, that you talk about, there's a figure there, 15, 16, which is you're hoping to have, so perhaps we could have the figure. In addition, you have decided to have 3 years as the time for residents before they're on the...
Donald, the brick-by-brick question and that one you're just going to ask now come up under later items. So, Alison, you don't need to answer those, but we will hold those questions to the appropriate part of the agenda.
Right.
Okay? So, I just need you... So, let's do those 4 questions. There's 2 you'll need... Sorry. Questions on the housing standards and sizes and all that, and then the second one was about the local plan, Purley Travellers site.
Thank you, Donald, for your questions. We talked about improving housing standards, and then you touched on the size of accommodation. I think that goes across 2 areas. But firstly, improving housing standards. One of the things the council is responsible for is the Decent Home Standard, and Leonard's been very involved in that. And that's about ensuring that our council properties are up to the Decent Home Standard and meet the criteria of that. And clearly, for a housing stock as big as ours, that's an ongoing issue, because there's a time period that kitchens, bathrooms, windows, etc. should be within an age range. So as soon as you've done one lot, the next lot appears up in that time range. So what we've got to do is always be ensuring that we're aware of the condition of our council stock, we're aware of how old everything is and when it needs replacing, and then putting in place a maintenance programme that means everything that comes into that programme comes in at the right time. And clearly there's always situations where something falls out of the time period because of whatever, and ensuring that we have provision to address that as well. So I'm confident at the moment that we're constantly meeting the Decent Home Standard, and that we have planned for the future to ensure that our stock can be maintained at that Decent Home Standard. One of the issues around that is the issue of the reduction in rents that, you know, was compulsory placed on councils, which meant that there was a 1% reduction in rent year on year, which was quite difficult. And I know that your colleague Dudley Mead agreed with this, because most councils have a 30-year plan. So to have that suddenly changed and your income coming in suddenly changed. But so far we're working with that to ensure that it doesn't affect our tenants and we continue to maintain our homes at a decent standard. Also the private rented sector, and clearly I touched on that under landlord licensing, also houses in multiple occupation. We now have an extended team, the landlord's licensing team, that deals with that, is able to go out, inspect properties and serve improvement notices or take further action when things aren't up to standard. You touched on room sizes. Now, anything that actually comes into the borough and through a planning application has to meet the London plan room sizes. So, and actually London's are a bit more generous than you'd find outside of London. So those standards have to be met. But clearly, if something comes before planning and it's a house that somebody's building to sell or whatever, and they say it's 3 rooms, all those rooms can meet the room size and the standards and be given planning permission, but we have no control or authority over who lives in that property once it's sold or rented or whatever, and it's at that stage overcrowding comes in. And we also recognise that although we have a housing allocations list that we're going to talk on later, that's quite a strong list, so you have to be quite overcrowded in this borough before you even qualify to come on our list, so that we know that many thousands of people in this borough are living in overcrowded accommodation, but unfortunately because of the lack of supply, we can only help those most in need. And again, just to touch on some of our temporary accommodation, which is temporary accommodation, it is where families would generally be overcrowded. You wouldn't permanently place them there, but we are very confident that it is a step up from the bed and breakfast accommodation and the detached bathrooms and shared kitchens that people were currently using in the past. The proposed allocation of a site for Gypsy and Travellers behind Purley Oaks Recycling Centre. So it is the Purley Oaks depot and not the recycling centre it infringes on, just to make that clear, because there have been some questions in the past. You will probably be aware, and certainly through planning, that we've had an extensive search for suitable sites around the borough. The national planning framework actually requires the council to supply what sort of assessed as the housing need for Gypsy and Travellers in the boroughs, and that's a requirement of putting through your local plan and getting accepted. So we did need to ensure that there was a permanent Gypsy and Travellers site, and indeed it is our responsibility as a council to meet the housing needs of all those that require it. A lot of thought went into Purley Oaks as site before it was designated, and we thought that it was the most appropriate site in the borough. When we went out to consultation, it was listed as a residential site, and nobody had raised objections at that period of time. So that is the site that has been chosen, thought has gone into it, and certainly, as I've said, we're now up to the second phase of submissions on the local plan, and anyone who's got reasons why technically they believe that's not a suitable site or it shouldn't be designated, then please put your objections or your reasoning into the council, and it will be considered by an independent inspector.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies for my lateness. I've been southern railed. From what I saw of the presentation, again, very interesting. Obviously, it is arguably the most important brief in the borough, given the challenges that we're facing as both a city and a London borough. I think just something I've read the other day on that issue of overcrowding and room sizes that Donald mentioned before I got into my questions. I think someone was saying that I think the modern average size of a one-bed flat in London is about the size of a Jubilee line carriage in terms of square footage. But I think on that, you've got to look at some of the other questions. Do we want to go up? We've got Antes. Take a look at Purley. Do we want to go onto the Greenbelt Metropolitan Open Land? Again, that's got its own complications. Obviously, people float the brownfield land as a solution, but I think it was even Zach Goldsmith's campaign believed that there was only enough supply of brownfield land in London to last one mayoral term. So, you know, we've got very real challenges, and particularly it's now a London borough. We've got quite a low building line, and we've got the Greenbelt on our border. So we have it both ways, and it's tough. I think my questions primarily sort of focus on how Croydon is dealing with some of the policy announcements moving higher up in the policy agenda. Obviously, we've seen from Mayor Khan announce the first phases of the London Living Rent, and I'm just wondering, firstly, I know it's early days, but how do we think this will fit in Croydon? I know there's a lot of details to be flushed out, but you know, is there a way it's going to be considered within the Croydon local plan, or is it just too early to tell? Obviously, TfL land, I know we're seeing Kidbrooke in Greenwich being looked at, but is there any of this in Croydon? I know there's some land holdings around Tramlink, but is that sufficient? If so, you know, are there any staged conversation with the Mayor of London on freeing this up to provide our affordable housing needs? And finally, obviously, the neighbourhood and not infrastructure planning bill that our local MP is starting to take through the House. Obviously, welcome neighbourhood planning, but we see what happens far too often in some parishes where a lot of people take the sort of wrong end of the stick with this and treat it as an excuse for no houses rather than appropriate housing and appropriate development. And obviously I know it's quite sensitive with the local plan in certain areas in Croydon. I'm just wondering if there's been any interest expressed in pursuing neighbourhood plans, particularly given some communities actually thinking planning is very much at the forefront of their lives at the moment.
Thank you, Stephen. Can I first touch on one thing that I didn't touch on with Donald, and you were talking about the housing standards and the space standards. Is the one thing that is different is that you will see coming through at the moment a number, and we've talked about permitted development, where the government said that you can convert office blocks without meeting space standards. So at the moment that you'll see a number of blocks that came in under that criteria and will be coming through, and because they were allowed under permitted development, they won't meet the space standards that are required either by Croydon or by the London Plan, or in fact by national planning policy. But you will be aware that there was cross-party objection on this, and we now have an Article 4 for our town centre, our Croydon Opportunity Area, that prevents that coming through. But just in case that question came up. Stephen, yeah, you touched on sort of housing needs and the local plan. And as you know, we have, both under our own local plan, have a housing need target. So it is assessed what the future housing need is for the borough, and we must meet that. And that's not only set by ourselves locally, but it's set by the London Plan and how much each borough is expected to bring forward. So it is something that we've looked at fully, and we believe that Croydon can play its part. But we think one of the jobs for the Mayor of London is to ensure that all boroughs across London are playing their part. And also, I think London has to be working with those boroughs that surround London to see how some of those issues can be resolved. Because you're entirely right, we do need new homes. We're hoping that by sensitive and sustainable intensification of certain areas, and particularly where you've got transport hubs, that we can increase. But you can't have both. You can't say, right, we won't build on green belt and metropolitan open land, which this council has been committed to, as I believe the Mayor of London is. Then the homes do have to go somewhere, and really intensification of areas that have good transport links and allow and have the sustainability for that is the direction that we're going in. Mayor Khan and the London Living Rent, it's certainly something that we're looking at, and we think that we're in a position to deliver that or a similar scheme within the borough by our accommodation that we're bringing forward by brick. So we're looking at the best way to get the best deal to ensure people can have truly affordable homes to rent in the borough. The TfL land, it is certainly something that we'd be interested in. You talked about land being held back for extension of Tramlink, which certainly is happening, but we've also got to ensure we want to see, and this council, Brighton Main Line, that we're pushing for that, the improvements there. and around some of our major stations, which are West Croydon, East Croydon and Norwood junctions, so to also ensure that TfL land there is necessary for the expansion of that. But we'd certainly be in conversation about any other land that's coming forward and can be used, and how we can work with the Mayor of London to deliver homes on those sites. Neighbourhood planning is a contentious issue, and I think it's something that a lot of people, and it's exactly the point, that the idea behind it is about, you know, how can you encourage good, sustainable home development, whereas some people have seen it as an area where you can actually prevent homes development. But we've had little interest, and I think it's worked outside of London much better than it has in London. I think it's quite difficult and complex, and also quite time-consuming for people, and you've got to have a bit of income and knowledge to actually push those plans forward as they currently stand. So there have been a few expressions of interest. The one I remember is towards Crystal Palace, which was a joint borough one, but certainly they've not come through at this stage.
Thank you, Chair. I'm deputising for Councillor Mike Selver tonight, who's unwell. So please forgive me in advance if I'm out of scrutiny order, but I'll try and be in order for the Cabinet member. Just want to touch on, or start where you finished, Alison, in terms of empty properties and bringing them back into use. You know, as a councillor for New Addington, when I'm dealing with bits and pieces of housing casework, it's often something people note to us. There's this empty property, what's happening with it, can I move in there, you know, that kind of thing. And it seems like we've had some quite good progress on it. So I was just wondering if you could kind of flesh out a little bit how that progress has been achieved, what some of the challenges around bringing properties back into circulation are, and you know, how much more opportunity is there, I guess, in this space. And then, you know, what's the nature of those tenancies, or how those properties used once they're brought back into use?
Well, first of all, I think I'd start. We have a fantastic empty properties officer, Francis Burton, who's worked for the council for many years, and he really does a stunning job, and he really achieves good results. So having good officers in place, him and his very small team have actually managed to bring these properties back into use. So we're really pleased that that's been achieved. The challenges are, you know, the first question is, why is a property empty? And that can be for all sorts of reasons. Some of that's financial reasons. People have inherited properties or bought properties, and then for some financial reason they're unable to sustain it. We also get a lot where it's been left to a family, and a family never sort out who's actually going to take on the property, that kind of thing. Some people have deliberately bought properties as an investment and have chosen not to rent them out. So there's a whole range of reasons as to why a property is empty. And so a lot of work goes into actually bringing them back, negotiating, and as you'll be aware, compulsory purchase orders of this property, which we do as the last stage, are the very last thing, and very difficult. You've got to eventually get to court after a lot of work and proved. And often it's quite difficult, because somebody will say, OK, we've listened to you, so we're going to do this. And then 6 months later you go back and they haven't done that, and then you have to encourage them again, and they might do a very little bit of it but still not get further, and all of these are hoops that the council has to go forward with. But you've seen where it has been done successfully, and that's mostly where we're working with willing owners of that property. And the majority, what they've done is, where we've put our families in, has come to some kind of agreement. So the council will renovate the properties, they will cover the costs on renovating the properties, and they will then have the lease of the property, probably for a period of over 5 years, in which we can place our homeless families, our families on the waiting list, which is far better than them being in some kind of emergency accommodation. They're proper homes for the family, and so that reduces our bill, so it cancels each other out, our bill on emergency accommodation, and also gives a family a much better start than they would be otherwise in another type of accommodation. So most of those is through an agreement with the council, bringing it back into use, and then them handing it over to the council for a period of time to manage and let out for them.
First of all, can I welcome you to your new scrutiny committee, because you were under health before, and I think we've met under the old scrutiny committee under health. So I just wanted to update some of the stuff you said at the last health scrutiny. I hope we've now got good news on the 6-week target for bed and breakfast because of the opening of the office accommodation. So I'm hoping those targets are either 0 now or going down. Just in terms of the new accommodation, some constituents, when you came to health, you said that it could possibly be temporary accommodation, but if people liked staying there, it might turn into permanent accommodation. I understand from constituents that there are certain rules about having guests staying overnight and things like that. I just wondered how that would work if they wanted it to move to permanent accommodation, how those rules would work. The other areas I want to cover is New Addington Pool. When it went to planning, it seemed to be a bit unclear what would happen to the old pool site once the new leisure centre had been built. I wondered whether there was any update on that. And then finally, I thought an admission from your excellent presentation was what's happening with Westfield, and because obviously that's key to housing, and perhaps an update on that.
I'd love to give you some good news on the 6 weeks targets, but it wouldn't be good news. They have been reduced slightly, but at the moment, despite the number and the properties that we brought into use, this new temporary and emergency accommodation, the number of people still coming through at homelessness, and the lack of supply outside of that, so the lack of move-on accommodation means that remains steady. But I am pleased to say, or not pleased to say, that actually the homelessness as in people doesn't come under me, it comes under my colleague, Councillor Louisa Woodley, and I deal more with the accommodation. But I know that through Gateway Services, the work that Louisa and Mark Fowler and Mark Meehan are all doing together, that we're slowly getting that drop in, and really the only answer to this is around also increasing the supply, but also around prevention. So the more that we can do to help people remain in the accommodation that they are becoming homelessness, the better those figures are going to come. But for Croydon, like all other London boroughs, it's really still a struggle on those figures. The most of the temporary accommodation that's gone over to permanent would be council housing stock rather than the temporary accommodation like Windsor and Concord House. So there would be no plans to convert that, certainly at this stage, to permanent accommodation. We would hope that all of those people that are currently in there would move on to a next stage, which would all either be homed in the private rented sector, possibly housing association or the council's housing stock. So those, the ones where, because of the types of property, you do have to have some restrictions, wouldn't be converted to permanent. I'll touch on Westfield and then I might ask Colin to comment on New Addington Leisure Centre. Westfield, they are back in, and those of your colleagues that are on the planning committee would have been to, I think it's 2 pre-apps where they've slightly altered what they want to bring forward, the number of homes, there's been bits added, bits taken away, and our planning officers are working with them to ensure that that can come to planning as soon as possible. But I'm sure you'd agree with a development of that size that that's important to Croydon, that we want to look back in the future and say, look, isn't that a great addition to Croydon? Not how did we let that happen? So we're working very closely with Westfield and Hammerson, who, on their designs, on what's coming forward to ensure that everybody's got a happy outcome and it's the best possible opportunity for residents of Croydon. Colin, I don't know if you want to touch.
Yeah, with regard to New Addington, we have a planning condition on the leisure centre consent which says we need to look at meanwhile uses across the sites that are vacated as a result of that development. So we would speak to people locally about what those meanwhile uses are. As you probably know, there's a town and village green designation there which very much defines what we can and can't do with buildings in close adjacency to the TVG. So we start a conversation locally about exactly what those meanwhile uses are and for how long they're in place there.
Thanks, Chair. Just to come back in on that New Addington development, obviously there are some uncertainties with the site. You mentioned Town and Village Green and meanwhile uses and all that kind of stuff. Are we still on track?
Yes.
And is there a date?
Yeah, well, we have a date for a start on site of enabling works for around November of this year, and then for main works in the early part of 2017. And then due for an opening, I think it's towards the end of the summer 2018.
Thank you. I congratulate you. It's, the list was endless, and I thought, goodness, I'm frantically just jotting things down in various areas. So congratulations to yourself and, of course, your deputies. It is a great portfolio. First of all, I start saying it's great to see that the National Trust came down, because I know we're members ourselves. It was brilliant. It was really I was really proud that, yes, usually, you know, people talk about Croydon architecture, and I know as mayor, I've definitely gone around saying how fantastic it is. There's brilliant things. So it was really great that, yes, as the council, we were recognising that and really getting National Trust and getting National Trust to recognise it as well. So that's brilliant news. There are a few things, and I'd love to congratulate on a great deal, but I think we'd be here all night. So let's just move on to the questions. First one, infrastructure. We talk about the local plan, and you can see that there's a great deal happening there. And you mentioned the roads. What I'd like to know is how are we engaging with TfL? Because some roads, especially I know within Addiscombe, are definitely going to cause tremendous problems with bottlenecks, etc., that will occur as developments actually materialise. So it would be good to see what we're doing in terms of our partnership working with TfL. And while we're talking about that, it would also be good to hear what we're doing in terms of the work or any partnership working that we have with utility companies as well, because that's going to be even more important as traffic levels increase. It would certainly, and I'd certainly like to know if we do have a strategic plan for a long-term plan for our road networks, and I know it would just be good for us all to be reminded of that, I should say. Next, moving on, would be you talked about let's see, accommodation, emergency accommodation. Well, yes, there's certainly a struggle for that everywhere in London at this moment in time. And Croydon still benefits from a lower rent, as we all know, in comparison to other boroughs. So what measures are we actually taking to try and encourage other boroughs, especially the inner boroughs, to look elsewhere, I suppose, really, rather than utilising our emergency accommodation that's much needed for our people, having a knock-on effect? Moving on. You mentioned HMOs. They are absolutely vital. I know I hear individuals, and I'm sure every councillor must hear individuals coming to them and telling them their concerns that in quite a lot of people are living at a particular place. I do tend to contact local officers, and I do feel annoyed that I have to do it constantly. What are we doing to try and combat? And I know that there's work, but it'd be nice to know what's happening there. In terms of the apprenticeships, it would be good to know how well we're doing in terms of how well we're doing, because it's I've seen the figures up there, but have we increased the apprenticeships by how much, what percentage I mean, and how that actually works over the last 3 years, and how does that actually work in comparison to our neighbouring boroughs? Moving further forward, improvement notes. Just very quickly reading my notes as I'm just trying to take things in. Let's see.
Just that we give Alison a chance to answer those questions, and if
Okay.
you've got some follow-ups.
That's
okay.
lovely.
Thank you for those, Patricia. Can I start by kind of saying, although my portfolio is extensive, a lot of those areas that you touched on go outside my portfolio, but I'll go through them and touch on where I can. Tremendously exciting, the National Trust being here, and we've had meetings with them since, and I know that they're going to be involved in the Fairfield Halls as that comes forward, but we'd like them to come down and celebrate some other things about Croydon. So we said, why don't you come and look at all our green spaces? So we will push them on that. The local plan, you touched on how obviously the local plan is a planning related document, so some of the technicalities that you went into clearly wouldn't be covered under that planning portfolio, but I think it does come under the growth zone. Some of that is managing, and as part of the growth zone. So the growth zone is something that Croydon has brought forward, and I think we're ahead of the game of a lot of other boroughs, because we're not only focused on the regeneration, and that means shops and offices and homes and buildings, but we've also recognised that a huge infrastructure has to come to make that all sustainable. And that's how, and it was with cross-party agreement that we went to the government and requested the money in order to set up our growth zone, and in fact got an agreement for the growth zone and all that comes with it. And as part of that, we did have quite an extensive programme of things that we thought should happen in Croydon, and we've worked very closely with TfL and the GLA in order to not only get that list ready, but ensure that we're not paying for things that other people should be. So things that are TfL's responsibility, we're working closely with them to ensure that that happens, again, with Network Rail. And also things that under planning agreements would come forward from the Westfield development, because clearly it's a huge development, but they've got to play their part in ensuring that that's successful and helping the borough with that. So as part of the growth zone, we've got these 39 projects, and a lot of those are transport related. And so that's ensuring that that infrastructure around trams, around roads, around rail and so on does come forward, but also investment in our streets, because at the moment we've got Wellesley Road, although we've put the first crossing in near the Fairfield Halls and others are due to go in, you'll see the major works that are going on there. So people actually find Croydon a pleasant place to walk and cycle in. They're not put off, there's not a big divide in the middle. So that's equally as important as the transport, to try and encourage people out of the transport and onto our streets. And so that is being brought forward by our new growth zone director, who will have responsibility for ensuring those projects. And one of the other things that we have been working with outside organisations, and I'm forgetting the name of it, and Colin might know, the thing to keep everything on track.
5-year integrated delivery plan.
Yes, and so there is, and beyond that is also a system in place so that any time we know exactly what developments are going up, what roadworks are happening, where things are being dug up, so that we can ensure that, because there is such huge regeneration, that's all coming together. So there's a dashboard that's been developed to kind of keep that in place, and so that we can monitor that. So hopefully that answers. And the utility companies will clearly be part of that with such major works going on. Emergency accommodation, you were talking about how although our rents are rising very fast, they're still lower than parts of London. And obviously I just want to put it in the point that for people in Croydon, we also have that lower income, the lower wage levels. So it's still very desperate in Croydon, but you can see why bodies are being moved from inner London to outer London. And there's actually an extensive bit of work, and I don't know if Leonard wants to touch on this, but we have been working for some time, and I think it's one of the things that we are saying to the Mayor of London, we have said to the previous Mayor of London, and indeed London councils, that this is a problem that has to be resolved by London as a whole, because only if we're working together can we actually resolve that. But work has already gone on where we've got together with all the other boroughs in London, although a few have gone a bit AWOL at the moment, about setting the highest level of income that you'd actually pay for emergency accommodation. So it was in the past that somebody who was letting out a B&B would go to the highest bidder. And so if, and I'm saying Greenwich, but it's not, no grounds for that, Greenwich suddenly offered £100 a night and we could only afford £50 a night. So that kind of thing. So we did have, and we introduced an agreement across London about setting those levels for bed and breakfast accommodation. But that work is continuing under our director, Mark Meehan, who's working and has quite an extensive knowledge about this, about how, because it's a problem both for us, we're placing people out of Croydon, so we're not, and that's because at the time people need to be housed, you have to find somewhere to house them. But London councils do need to work closely together to try and redress this, because it's crazy. On some accounts, we've got the same amount of people in a borough as they've got in ours, and so we need a system to really sort that out. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that.
Just to add that we agreed for about 2 years now the rates that we pay across London to avoid each borough competing against each other. And one of the proposals from the new mayor is also to create a procurement vehicle that allows all of London to procure together accommodation. That would mean that the internal competition that exists between boroughs would also be managed that way.
I think your last question was around houses in multiple occupation, HMOs. And you're right, they are a vital form of housing. And often when people have an objection around HMOs, it's not the HMOs, it's often how they're run or how they're managed or how they're upkept that is the problem rather than that. But it is a housing opportunity, particularly for young people, and often young people who are working in the city or in London and so on. You see many HMOs around our transport hubs, and they are necessary, but we do have to ensure that they're maintained, they're run properly, and most of all, they're actually safe for people to living in, because there's a higher risk of fire and so on and those sort of things. So again, our landlords licensing team and the private rented sector team, any that get reported to the council, we will go and inspect and ensure that they're up to standard. But there's shortly to be launched. The government are consulting on the current HMO licensing agreements and whether that should be extended, and we believe it will be extended to cover more properties, but I believe it's going to be out to consultation about what people should think. So Croydon will be very active in responding to that and what we feel is necessary to make them safer, pleasanter, but not to get rid of this opportunity for people that's what they can afford.
I certainly agree that, yes, good HMOs are absolutely brilliant. It's the ones, unfortunately, the ones that I have to report are the ones where I don't know if they actually registered as HMOs. But yes, I see. Mentioned apprenticeships, but I'm going to move on because the improvement notices that are being served for the landlord licensing scheme. I certainly appreciate that. I know the many years that when I've been councillor, I've certainly had to report issues and issues and issues. So it's great to hear that the scheme is running really well. And yes, there are improvement notices as well that are actually coming forth through just going out and looking. What I'd like to appreciate, and I'm sure we'd all like to know, is what are the main issues that you're getting? I think you touched on something to do with rubbish, which I know for me in Adscombe that was certainly an issue time and time again. So it would be interesting to hear how that actually how it ranks and what are the other main issues that are being dealt with. I'm sure other, especially individuals listening, would like to hear that. Temporary accommodation. Now, it may just be me, but I know that we do have land here, so I'm just going to put this forward and as to whether or not, I know it's not quite a policy meeting, but never mind, it's always worth putting it forward. But there are there are certainly other boroughs now that have actually done this, and it's temporary accommodation. They're cabins that are being used. I'm just wondering if the council's actually ever looked at that for temporary accommodation that would provide very quick accommodation, of course. And then there's this, Box Park, I think, will be the last one. Box Park, it's great to see that that's happening and taking place. Looking forward to that, definitely. And I know that many other individuals in our borough that I've spoken to are. What I'd like to know is what's the, let's say the input from the ethnic minorities in terms of what's the offer for individuals that would like to actually experience different ethnicities, experiences.
Miss out the apprenticeships. So my comment on that is what I showed you on the screen is about what the contractors that have been contracted by the housing department are actually delivering. So as a wider council, I wouldn't have those kind of figures on apprenticeships. I think it would come under Mark Watson's portfolio. But you will be aware that the council have put in, and I'm not sure, Sean, do you know the name of it? The sort of contracts that you've got in now that it's a social response, social value. So it's about how many apprenticeships, how many bringing forward builders and so on that are actually Croydon firms and so on. So all contracts the council issues now require standards of that. And certainly going back to the planning on our new SIL and 106 that we're drawing up at the moment after the review certainly puts in there more around apprenticeships and our expectation for that. And of course the council's also launched their Croydon Works, the jobs brokerage scheme, which is about bringing those forward for Croydon people. But most of that's outside of my portfolio. The improvement notices, generally improvement notices actually have to be that under the law for certain things, so they're usually for substandard accommodation, so they're around drafts and the lighting, it's not safe, it's not warm, it's not fit or healthy. So it would be issues like that. The other issues around rubbish and bins are things that we've been, because we have the landlord's licensing scheme, we're much more in touch with landlords. We know exactly who landlords are and so on. They're completely on a register, where that was a huge task for our officers in the past to actually find out who ran a property. So most of that around the bins is done by discussion with them about them being good landlords and do you know that your tenants haven't got these bins? And you know, some we've had to get a bit harder with and talk about their licence, but most of them, it's enabled our environmental services to work directly with landlords to ensure that that refuse collection is there and that tenants are notified. We're doing that work with lettings agencies as well, so that people know what day their bins are, that we're encouraging landlords to ensure when your tenants come in, they know what they can put in the bins, they know where else they can take stuff, they know what day it'll be collected, and that's been a huge gap in the past. Other things, I mean, one of the first things that we did notice when we went into landlords licensing and we initially registered properties, that the number of properties that applied for licences with a brand new gas safety certificate, well, by law, and it may be a coincidence that they all had to apply for that gas safety certificate at that time, but by law they were already required to hold those. So I think the very effect of licensing them without going on ensured that properties had these things that actually they were already by law required to have. Temporary accommodation, we are in discussion at the moment with a couple of providers of modular accommodation. In a borough like Croydon, and as we talked about and Donald was touching on earlier about the sites that have come forward, it is, you know, we've only got so many sites and we do want to build permanent homes for people. But there are sites that aren't going to be suitable for that or are stuck in a period of time, and we are discussing modular homes at the moment with providers. The last one was Box Park. What you will find is Box Park is going to be absolutely packed full of different kind of street foods from all parts of the world, so there'll be a huge opportunity to, I think that will show our ethnic mix and certainly have opportunities outside of Croydon to actually look at the different types of food and the things that you can enjoy. So I think that's going to be really important. And certainly the 2-day festival that Box Park is launching, the first day of that, and I don't know what the official title is, but it's going to be a kind of grime music, a kind of music that encourages particularly ethnicity. We've seen some of our stars come from the north of the borough, from Thornton Heath, that have actually won MOBO awards and so on, and it'll give those groups and so on the opportunity to actually be playing at a big venue like that. And excitingly, I believe the second day is about South London talent as well. So it'll really be good to see some homegrown talent coming forward.
Thank you very much, Sean. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was really very comprehensive, and it shows you how hard you must be working. But also, you know, just incredible to have a portfolio like that, really. I hope my questions do relate to your portfolio, but I hope also that you might excuse me if they don't quite, because you are the deputy leader as well, and so you may be able to sort of say something on it. I've got 4 questions, really. Just wanted to know a bit more about the hub, how it's taking over Taberner House and when it's starting and when you expect things to be progressing and that sort of thing. So that's the first question. Second one is about Fairfield Hall site. Has work started there? I think they're really stripping out the asbestos and things like that, I would guess, but just wondered if it's still to schedule and a little bit on that, please. The third point was you did raise about the convent in Ashburton, and I just wondered where the money was coming from for that. I had raised it once already on Scrutiny and Overview Committee, but I didn't feel, I just got such a general answer. I wondered if, you know, you could say, especially we've got such a shortage of housing, funding for housing and everything else, that, you know, I just would like more precisely, really, where the money's coming from for that. But it's great to be preserving an old building and things and bringing it into community use, and it'd be lovely for the residents, you know, but just like to know. And then the fourth thing is, as the deputy leader, really, when we leave this meeting, we're going to, and this seems to happen every meeting we have, we go out and see people all in Queen's Gardens, and are they homeless people? Could you just tell us a little bit about who they are, and do we know? I mean, I know we do have officers going there and helping and things as well. I'd like to know a little bit more about that if possible, but also, are they homeless people? Where are they housed? What do we know about them, and how we're helping them, really? Thank you.
What I'm going to do with the first 2 questions on the hub and Fairfield Halls, I think one of the signs of a good administration, a good council, is employing great officers. and we've got Colin, yeah, which is...
Yeah, let me cover those too. So, Hub are currently working through their planning application with an architects, a Sterling Award-winning architects, in fact, called AHMM. So that's in the early stages of the pre-op process. We have a requirement on Hub within the deal that we've done for them to submit around February of next year. So that's when we anticipate the planning application to come through at the latest, hopefully a little bit before that, if that's at all possible. That would give us a planning timescale which would suggest a start on site around May or June on the main part of the programme, with first completions coming in from about 16 to 24 months thereafter, depending on the complexity of the work that they have to do and the planning consent that they get. On Fairfield Halls, we are on programme, and as you've noted, there is works underway there. The main focus of that work at the moment is around intrusive surveys rather than the actual strip-out works themselves. Those strip-out works will start probably in the next 3 to 4 weeks or so, depending on the full results of the surveys. And that then rolls into a programme where the main body of works would start from the spring of next year, really, in terms of construction work. But there's quite a lot of strip-out works, as you can imagine, with a building of that era. There's a lot of complexity in those strip-out works and in the demolition works as well. So that will take some time, but bring us in towards spring, somewhere when the main body of the programme will start. But it's very much on track, still on set for completion around the autumn of 2018.
On the, I don't want to put you off again, but I give you my assurance, the allocation of the 1 million for Ashburton, I haven't got the details here, but we'll ensure it's sent to the Scrutiny Committee in order that you've got your answer for that. Queen's Gardens, it's a difficult issue. At the moment, we do have an issue in Queen's Gardens around antisocial behaviour. And as you say, officers have been doing an extreme amount of work. And we do have a homelessness problem, as you'll be aware, and I'll touch on that, with a street homelessness beyond our major homelessness problem in Croydon. But actually, from some of the antisocial behaviour that we've actually had in Queen's Gardens has led to a lot of people who were street homeless moving out of Queen's Gardens to other areas in central Croydon. I'll touch on that in a minute, car parks, etc. So you've got an assortment of people that have been gathering there. Many of them actually do have homes, have an alternative. It has become a gathering place, and unfortunately many people gather in Queen's Gardens, as we see every day, to have a good time, to be out with their families and friends, do an assortment of sports, sitting there, picnicking, all sorts of kind of things go on in Queen's Gardens. But there is a very tiny minority that are behaving in a way that is upsetting to other people, deterring them from walking through the gardens, particularly at the late night. And they have been approaching people, upsetting them and behaving in a manner. At the moment, we have got some work going forward on that, which I don't want to go into detail in this meeting for obvious reasons, but we are hoping to address some of those issues. So it is a group of people. As we brought it up, the kind of homelessness, and I had the opportunity, Evolve, the previous YMCA, have been leading on a piece of work with a number of other organisations around homelessness in European cities. And I think it was 2 weeks ago they did do, we tried to do a survey of the homeless people in our borough, and it's the same survey that was carried out in a number of other European cities so that data could be collected and we could look at ways of addressing how people got there. And I went out overnight with these teams and spoke to a number of street homeless people, which quite shocking stories really, and most of the people you know, every day this council deals with people who present themselves as homeless at our doors, and generally that's around eviction or loss of their home, or it may have been repossessed. But our street homelessness obviously have had some kind of crisis in their life, and many other issues have actually led them there. So it's a different type of problem that we need to tackle. But I think it's quite exciting project that we're going forward with Evolve and the other people involved in this to try and address and look at new ways of actually tackling street homeless, because it is a growing problem in this country. It's a growing problem in Croydon. And some of the ways that we've dealt with that in the past have failed. And so one of the schemes that a lot of people are now looking at is called Home First, where you try to get people. Often street homeless have been asked to jump through hoops, so to give up their drugs or to give up their alcohol or accept certain kinds of treatment before they can even get anywhere by being placed in housing. And that's really difficult if you don't have a home or some kind of security. So a lot has been done to look at actually placing people in accommodation and then putting the services in to work with them, and whether this will be more beneficial. So that's something the council's also taking forward, but with partnerships and also the community. And what was fantastic was this project asked for volunteers from the community, and I think they had about 80 volunteers came forward to do the surveys overnight. And when I went along, many of them were young people, which I thought was a really positive thing. They'd given up their time. They went to an extensive training session. They then went out overnight to speak to these people. So it shows, you know, our young people have got a lot going for them. The survey's been done, and there's Evolve are now leading on setting up meetings and seeing how not only the council but all of those communities that work with homelessness, but also how we as a community, the whole borough, can look at ways of addressing this. So it'll be an ongoing piece of work.
Donald? And that's the last question of for this section.
I'm reminded that in New Addington there are open spaces larger than the space which you're planning to build on in Montpellier Road. Are you offering these sites to Brick by Brick? I hope that you're not, and I hope that you will not build on Montpellier Road. Very cramped community site. But in fairness, you should be offering in New Addington.
Donald, you are the elder statesman here, and we are respectful. But I've already explained that comes under the Brick by Brick later on. And secondly, I'm sure your Conservatives colleagues doesn't want it to be noted that you are wanting to build on all the green spaces in New Addington. It won't go down very well in the leaflets there. So I'm sure you'd like to withdraw that statement.
I'm asking whether the Cabinet member intends to build on New Addington. I'm not saying I want to build on New Addington.
Just for clarity, Claire, he did say he didn't want to build on New Addington, but he didn't want to build on Montpellier Road as well. Just for clarity.
Implication from for the first time round seemed to be that he was encouraging the Cabinet member. But we're not going to actually even answer that one, because actually that question is coming under potentially under the Brick by Brick, and I will leave those comments there. So I just want to say that I'm drawing this item to a close. Can I thank you, Alison, for this one? You're staying for the other parts. So I'm going to go on to item 7, which is the housing allocation strategy. The report for this item can be found at pack page 15, and I've got Leonard here. I had another officer potentially being here for this meeting, but I'm assuming it's a one-man band.
That's correct. Thank you. What I'll do highlight quickly the changes that are proposed for the allocations scheme. Earlier in the year, that is around March, the Cabinet charged officers to commence consultation on specific proposals in terms of changes to the allocation scheme. In quick summary, there are 3 areas of changes. The first is around residency qualification. The other is around encouraging and incentivizing potential homeless households to engage with the council's gateway service to find a way to prevent their homelessness. The third is introduction of choice-based lettings. This is advertising properties and inviting potential applicants to bid, put in bids for the advertised properties. On the first proposal, which is the residency qualification, currently the allocation scheme requires a qualification of 12 months residency within the borough. The proposal is to increase the length of residency from the 12 months to 3 years. And the key reasons are to ensure that as resources, that is housing, becomes a diminishing resource, as we all would recognize, that what is available is given to local residents. And the proposal is structured on the basis that if we to truly demonstrate that you have a local connection to the borough, 3 years is considered to be a reasonable period of residency within the borough. And it's consistent with the government proposal, which is that to demonstrate a local connection, you should have a minimum of 2 years. But we also looked at what is available in surrounding local authorities, and the proposal is that 3 years is moderate. It is not at the upper end of what other authorities are doing, but it also is a sufficient period to demonstrate a connection with the borough. There are proposed in the changes some exceptions. For example, as currently exist, armed forces personnel, because the council made a commitment to armed forces personnel, they will be exempt from the residency qualification. Homeless households who are placed elsewhere in temporary accommodation, that is outside the borough, will still qualify to be on the register. Existing council tenants who are already clearly have tenancies in the borough would also be exempt from that qualification. We as a council also participate in mobility schemes with other boroughs, and it's called, and we think that given our participation in those schemes, if other social housing tenants are moving across to us in exchange for our tenants moving across, they would also be exempt from that. The second proposal, which is about recognizing and giving incentive to potential homeless households to work with our gateway service. In the presentation from Councillor Alison Butler, she referred to the work and paid compliment to the work that our gateway services have been doing in ensuring that we work with potential homeless households, not only in terms of preventing their homelessness, but working with them to secure employment and also help them to move to a position of self-sustaining position so that they can be able to resolve their own housing problems. Part of the proposal is that we would give recognition by enhancing the priority that we give to these households to encourage them. Firstly, for example, if they are threatened with homelessness, to be able to negotiate and feel confident, empowered to negotiate with their landlords so that they can continue to stay where they are. In some cases, it will mean that they continue to stay at home instead of presenting to the council. And also to give them the confidence to go out to the private sector to secure accommodation through lettings agencies. In the presentation, the cabinet member also highlighted the point about a lot of households who are becoming homeless lose their accommodation from the private sector. They are already familiar with that sector, and we think that if we work with them, in many cases, they will be able to, their landlords will be able to agree for them to continue to live in that accommodation. The third change, which is proposed, is introduction of choice-based lettings, which is that, and one way of describing it is to show the difference between what we currently do and what is being proposed. At the moment, we offer direct allocation to housing applicants. So typically, an allocations officer will draw a short list and send a letter to the first placed applicant and say, you have been offered this property. The change that is proposed is that we would advertise all the available properties and invite interest, expressions of interest from prospective tenants, and then we would then draw a short list from that expressions of interest and then invite the highest prioritized case to accept the offer. What we're proposing is also that we would, through the consultation, that we would make some adjustments to cope with some situations where people are vulnerable and therefore are not able to directly participate in the bidding and selection process, so that they are covered. There are advantages in this, and one of them is that where people have positively expressed an interest in the property, they are more likely to want that property, and it would save considerable officer time in terms of litigation around refusals and requests for reviews. We spend, as officers, considerable time dealing with refusals and requests for reviews from many of our applicants. Those are the three areas, but the key bit is to say that some of the changes that we are proposing, we have consulted. We engaged in two stages of consultation. The first part was an engagement to frame the questions that we would ask in the consultation. And we carried out an extensive consultation with current applicants, residents as well, and homeless households, and agencies such as housing associations who we work extensively with. Chair, I think that would be all right for now.
Okay, so there's three changes that are being proposed. That effectively this is pre-decision scrutiny. I know quite a lot of work has been done on this over the last year. So I would hope at the end of this that we'd come up either with some conclusions or recommendations regarding those three changes. So I would ask for comments at the moment or questions regarding those three that just bring it to your attention of people who, it's page 15, patch page, and so it's paragraph 1.3, bullet point 1, 2 and 3, or little 1, 2 and 3, if you want to see what's actually being proposed. So who wants to go first? Andy, and then Ollie, and then Patricia.
Thank you for the report. I just want to ask some actual more general questions before we get into the specifics. So just on paragraph 1.4, you say you've done some online consultation on this. I'm just interested, I'm just thinking about the demographics of the people on the housing list and whether they're going to have easy access to online consultation. When you look at the appendix in Appendix 1, it suggests that about 0.4% of the responses were probably from people on the housing list. So I'm not sure how relevant the consultation has been, and just comments on how we could perhaps expand the consultation, how we could perhaps reach more of the people on the housing list with the consultation. I think in general the proposals are really welcome. I've seen it working in neighbouring boroughs. But I think for it to work, we need to be really transparent about number of people on lists, number of people on the waiting list, number of bids. My concern then is in paragraph 2.2, it says that we currently have 5,000 applicants on the housing register. When you look at the website, it says we have 10,500 people on the housing register. And we need to be accurate with figures if this is going to work. So I just want some clarity on how many people are on the register and whether we can make sure that we're publishing the correct details. I think I'll leave it there for now.
Yes, on the number of on the waiting list, the number is certainly around 5,000. Certainly, what is on the website, we would need to check and update. Because just reflecting back, I think that once upon a time we had that number on the register, so it's something that we will need to update. In terms of the consultation, there were two. The first part was as an exercise of an engagement, which part of that was through the online survey, which if you could categorize that as a first phase sounding out of people in terms of their thoughts. And then we moved from that to the extensive consultation, which framed the questions. In terms of engagement, yes, we engaged all residents in terms of sending leaflets about what we were consulting about and giving access in terms of where they can respond to and how they can do that. And to support that, because we do know from our own intelligence that in terms of consultation, depending on the subjects at stake, you don't get a very high engagement. So what we did to ensure that we drill down is also to, if you like, have more intensive engagement with identifiable groups of people. So, for example, we identified households who are in temporary accommodation, and we thought that they might not necessarily be engaging with us on an online survey. So we went to our schemes, where, such as Concord House, Sycamore, and had detailed, more intensive engagement on, with the people there.
Alison?
I only wanted to add on that, the point around open and transparent is, and taking aside that there seems to be some mistake on the website, is one of the benefits of this scheme is that it is far more open and transparent, so people can actually see how many council properties are going forward, what types of people are getting to bid for those, and how often they get taken, and also in what areas they come forward. Because at the moment, you'll know from your casework, we have schemes where people say, I don't want to live in certain areas, or I only want a certain type of house or a certain type of tenure. But this will really show people, they'll be able to see that actually if they want a 3-bedroomed house in Purley, that the likelihood of coming it forward, they may watch for a year and one will come forward or maybe none, but they may see 3-bedroom houses in other parts of the borough come much quicker. So I think the whole thing will actually open up to people, that they can actually see what's coming forward, who's getting that, where at the moment they're kind of in isolation with what's offered.
If I remember rightly, there may be a load of properties coming up in a certain space in Purley.
Thank you, Chair. Just two quick questions about the report. First of all, I just wonder whether these changes to the housing allocation system will address residents' perceptions of fairness in the system and how housing is allocated. And I'd just like to ask as well whether the impact of the changes on demand for housing has been modelled and what the expected impact will be?
On the first point, I think that it just re-echoes what Councillor Alison Butler said in terms of there is that perception that as a council, the council has loads and loads of properties, and it's just probably officers keeping the properties and not giving them out. But with the advertising, people will see what is available. They can put in their bid, and the proposal is that at the end of every bidding cycle, the successful information about who was successful will be published in the same way that the properties are advertised. So people will be able to have an idea and a picture of who has been successful, what is the value of their currency, and when I say the value of the currency, what I mean is they will know if the property is 45 Addington Road, what priority that person had, and make reference to their own circumstances to say if that person was in band 1 and had been the 300 or the second person on that list, and I am 40th on that list, if I had put in my bid, I would have been successful, or I wouldn't have been, because I'm in band 3 and all the successful applicants are in band 1. What we're also seeking with this proposal to mimic is the decisions that as citizens we make if we are going to buy a property. And we might decide that we want to live on a particular road. We're told the price of that property and immediately advise ourselves that we're better off looking at a different road. In the same way, if the type of property, the house with the south-facing garden, the value is people in band 1 and you're in band 3, you would then begin to, over time, advise yourself and say, with my band 3, I'll probably get a better prospect if I look at a flat instead of looking for a house with that south-facing garden. So the information out, the information about who has been successful will create that perception of fairness. In terms of the impact, we're going through that process of assessing the impact. Part of the adjustments that we'll be making would be responding to that impact. So, for example, we know that the BME households headed by female and young people are going to be affected on the basis that they are overrepresented among the housing list, but on the basis that there will be greater openness about the allocation process. In a paradoxical way, they would also benefit on the basis that they are overrepresented among the housing register.
Okay, so I've got Patricia.
Having seen this in action in other boroughs, when I was involved in housing before, I'd actually seen this in other boroughs and saw it worked really, really well. So it's great to see that it's coming here. It's a great system, I believe, for empowering those that are trying to go through and find secure accommodation. So, and speaking to some of my residents, very, very keen, really feel as though it is going to give a sense of empowerment. So it's great for that, and it's also great, it seems a win-win situation in that it's also going to release officer time instead of having to go out and actually show residents or prospective residents where what properties are about. So that's great in itself. The only thing that I could see, because I was trying to just weigh this up, And this is where I'm sure you're going to say, oh no, councillor. So please correct me, but the only thing I can see that could happen is that there will be, and it's already been said before, there may be areas that may not be as desirable as other areas. And what happens in that respect, and by this I mean, we will get individuals that will hold out, maybe 3 years, and still say that, yes, they still want something. Do they stay on the list? Is there going to be a cut-off point? Is there going to be some sort of intervention coming back to these individuals and saying, really, you know, you've gone through so many bids in this particular area, it's great, but, you know, have you considered this? Is there going to be any intervention? Because I foresee there are individuals that I know I've had in my ward that have said, I want such and such place, such, and I've had to be realistic and say, really, if you're, you know, is it a case of want or is it a case of need here? And so it's really been managing the expectations of individuals. How are we going to deal with individuals like that at the council? I can't see it being a major priority, but given time.
Yes, we do recognise that, and I'll just use a particular case example to illustrate the answer. So we have, So we had somebody who has to be urgently moved. That would be a case where we have to manage that process. We would put in the bid for that person, or say we require, if you haven't put in a bid over a defined period, then we would automatically put your name through the process, because we want to move you because of the urgency. Similarly, if we have somebody who is being accommodated at the expense of the council, say a homeless household, then we wouldn't afford the luxury of indefinitely waiting and keeping your time, hoping that ideal property will come through. We would have to put a limit to that. So we would intervene in some situations.
Thank you, Chair. And again, thank you, officers, for the presentation. Again, very useful and quite clear. A lot of thoughts gone into this and making sure that it is right for Croydon. Just a few quick questions. Again, obviously hear about the 5,000 register. With the change to 3 years, do we envisage any register fall off? If so, is there going to be any support for those that do fall off? Obviously, heard reference that a number of other local authorities have got similar length of times, if not greater. So for when they changed it, I'm just wondering if there's any sort of comparative figures for how these changes have sort of impacted some of the registers and the local housing markets. I'd like to sort of draw to 2.28, which I think is on page 8 of this section, page 22 of the whole pack, just mentioning about voluntary organisations. I'm just wondering which voluntary organisations we're looking at, how they could support, and what engagement work has happened with those voluntary organisations as to their willingness to support on this. I think two final points. Obviously, I know through the scrutiny process there's been a lot of conversations regarding unaccompanied asylum seekers. Just wondering if that's getting factored into this process or will be handled elsewhere in terms of temporary accommodation. And one final point, if I may, obviously there's a lot of really good work on this, but a lot of reliance as well on our PRS sector in Croydon. Do we think our PRS sector in the borough is strong enough, numerate enough, and good enough for the standards that we want?
Well,
we may have to park that last one for...
Yeah. On the number on the list, in terms of the impact and the observations from elsewhere, is that when authorities have introduced the changes, they've combined that with other changes, and therefore it's difficult to isolate the change. But in terms of here, we think that the impact will be, in terms of numbers dropping off, will not be a huge number, because we have actually dropped in the last 2-3 years. The number has already dropped significantly, so I don't anticipate a big drop in that way. In terms of the residency bed, I think that I think I've answered that part already. Yes. I'm trying to kind of remember the other bit other than the PRS bit. Yes, we are working certainly as a solution to our homelessness, to work increasingly with securing accommodation in the PRS sector. And in terms of tenure, the PRS sector in Croydon is big compared to the social housing sector. So we would think that there's opportunities for us to secure accommodation in there. I think I might need help in remembering the next question. In terms of the voluntary organizations, there are a number of organizations here in Croydon, and who particularly, such as the Citizens Advice Bureau, where we work with them, CREAS, we work with them to provide support, and disability forums to support people with disability. So we engage with them through this exercise. And I think that part of the bit that supports to help people put in their bids, we would be offering training to these agencies when we've got our bidding system in place.
Can I just say thank you on this? Okay. What we've got is, as a committee, is there are sort of 3 issues. As I said, there is the
Sorry, because I wanted to ask some general questions. I just wanted to ask a specific policy question on the 3 years. Obviously, we're all ambitious for Croydon to be a university town at some stage, and I just wonder whether there's any correlation between university towns and there being a longer period, say 5 years, because we know, just as a hypothetical, student sometimes goes away, their mum and dad will say, well, we're making them homeless. And, most university courses are about 3 years. So I just wonder whether nationally there's any correlation between university towns and having a slightly longer period.
I don't believe that to be the case, because what's broadly in terms of residency, when children have left home, their home address continues to be their principal home, although they'll be away at universities for 3 years or 4 years. When they continue to be members of their parents' household. So if we had a student here who went off somewhere else and the parents made an application, we would expect them to be included, unless they deliberately make the decision not to be included.
But we also just need to accept that most students, because it currently happens now, because they've got low vulnerability, they rarely get onto the list anyway, because they are not in the same housing need. And actually something that we looked at scrutiny for young people about how we help those young people in those scenarios when we had the students from Croydon College last year looking at the whole issue of housing and young people. Okay, so the council's is suggesting 3 changes. One on a residency's requirement, changing it from previously from 1 year to 3 years. Secondly, the requirement that there should be proactive engagement. And thirdly is to bring in choice-based lettings. What I'm hearing from this evening, and I'll take 2 and 3, which is the proactive engagement and choice-based lettings, I haven't heard any sort of dissent. So I'm assuming that the committee is endorsing those 2 changes of the proactive engagement and bringing in a choice-based letting system. Because what I'd like to do is have a conclusion and maybe send something up to either Cabinet or that Leonard can include in any report going to Cabinet, that this committee have it. So I can just ask whether that is the case, that we agree with choice-based lettings coming in and that the requirement for more proactive engagement. Is that what I'm hearing? Agreed. Okay, so the first one was the resident requirement. It's moving from 1 year to 3 years. I have heard previously that a couple of people, maybe one person, felt that 5 years. The paper sets out the sort of reasoning for moving to 3 years, including in terms of the consultation of actually that's where the people who were consulted felt that was the fairest figure, and actually the numbers looking for more than 5 years, which was listed on page, I should have marked it up in my report, but it's in the appendix on page 26 out of 52, that actually should be more than, was 16% of the people consulted asked for a longer residency qualification. So I'm minded to actually, on grounds of sort of fairness and the fact that we've only got a limited housing stock, and that, of course, if we had a much larger housing stock and a much larger housing building programme, maybe the residency qualification could be looked at in the future. But I think it's a good compromise between some of those boroughs that have gone for which, you know, a 5-year, which I think in London terms is quite onerous, because some people, through no fault of their own, through schooling and stuff, do have to move around. So I think 3 years in terms of a London context is to me, it seems quite a fair level, because it means that people are just not turning up on the doorstep and getting to the top of the list, but also not waiting, well, I would see an inordinate length of time. So I don't know whether anyone else have a counter-proposal to supporting the engagement of 3 years.
Just raise one point. So if we propose, well, we suggested that we did agree with the 3 years. Yeah. We would expect there would be still flexibility if things changed. It wouldn't be fixed for a number of years, that it would stay at that level or anything like that, would it? Could you just clarify that? Well,
the reality is that any report can be brought back, as this has happened, because the report came in 2012, or was it 2011? 2012. So obviously within 4 years the report has already been taken and it's already been extended. So it doesn't fix it in stone for life. It just fixes it in stone until the Cabinet member or the officers come back and feel that there's a need to change. Yeah. On the basis of that, is the committee minded to also endorse the suggestion for a 3-year residency requirement? Thank you, Leonard, for this evening, for your extensive answers. What we're going to do, there will be some sort of conclusion recommendations winging your way as a result of this, because I know there's likely to be taken to a Cabinet meeting sometime soon. Okay, thank you. We're now on to item 7, which is the Brick by Brick Development Company. Well, welcome, Colin. Just before you go into the report, is it just quickly, can you just explain your connections in regards to this? Because it's in the report, but just for those people who've come to this item for the first time.
So, Chair, I am Director of Development for the Council and also Managing Director of Brick by Brick.
Hand over to you.
I don't intend to go through the report in too much detail, unless you really want me to, but effectively it runs through, on the basis of the brief for the committee, the key issues regarding Brick by Brick. Several reports have been through Cabinet previously, and indeed scrutiny previously on it. Effectively it runs through the corporate structure from 2.6 onwards, the board membership and the commissioning model of Brick by Brick. It deals in 2.9 with the funding model and then the delivery model in 2.10. There's then a whole series of work on the work to date, so that's the detail of the site investigations that we've undertaken due diligence work, etc., and then into the development work that we're now undertaking on the planning applications for the majority of sites under the Brick by Brick programme. The viability testing that we undertake for that programme and the way that we ensure quality is delivered throughout the units that we want to create under that programme. 2.17, there's a very brief but useful analysis of the outputs, so the number of units we're creating, the split of affordable housing, number of 3-bedroom units, for example, and how that compares to other programmes and the outputs from other programmes that we've delivered in the borough previously. There's a little section on College Green development and how we're progressing, which we've touched on earlier on in this meeting. And then from 221 onwards, there's a section on monitoring and how the council monitors the work of Brick by Brick, both as a shareholder and a lender, as a seller of land and as a planning authority. One thing to note as an appendix, Chair, is the list of sites that Brick by Brick are currently working on. Very small, for which apologies, but also a map so you can see how that's distributed across the borough. Now, that has been amended from previous sites that have been published as a result of more sites becoming public and entering into their pre-application planning process. So, at the Cabinet report, there was a certain number of sites. Subsequently, at scrutiny, there was a greater number of sites. And now at this committee, there is a greater number of sites again as more of those sites become public.
And I understand this is a list of small sites. I just think the officer who wrote the report took it rather literally and made everything rather small. So apologies for anyone of those who are struggling to read it. But I'm sure if you're on the web, I imagine you're able to expand it and enlarge it. So probably Andy's anyone who is enabled here to see it in its proper size. Okay, so I asked for this report partly because it's the whole issue of Curve and the lack of transparency of that organisation in terms of how both scrutiny could scrutinise it, but also just the general public. So firstly, I'd just like to welcome the fact that Colin and Alison are here tonight. Secondly, that they've given us a paper, that they have sort of broken it down into the areas of concerns about the reasoning. I would ask between Alison and Colin as just one clarity question, because one of the briefs was about the difference between Brick by Brick and Curve, right? And you have given quite a lot of information, but we haven't had the sort of the definite differences between Brick by Brick and Curve. So before I put it out to question, is it just what you think the difference is between Curve and why Brick by Brick is a better way of delivering new homes?
Colin would probably expand on this, but I think one of the major things, and the thing that strikes you most of all, it's different to Curve because the council is the sole shareholder of Brick by Brick. And as such, it receives 100% of any development profit arising from the development activity. And also, we're not then, it is the council driving forward, the council driving the affordable homes, looking at the sites and so on, and getting the best for Croydon people. And the business plan is not influenced by the commercial needs of another partner. I don't know.
I think, well, that's all absolutely correct. As well as that, the genesis of it is different. So Curve started off as an asset-based delivery vehicle where the council put its land in and another entity put its development finance in order to be able to develop. Now, that changed over time through the recession, and by the end of it, it was acting very much as that the other partner was a development manager, and the council was putting both land and funding into the process. This has started from a different point. The intention is that it's a private company which develops land. As Alison says, the council is 100% sole shareholder, so all development profit comes back to the council for reinvestment into either further development programme or other council services. And equally, its funding comes from the council as well, and there's a revenue model which sits behind the reasoning why the council should provide development finance into the company too. So it's a much more sealed commercial system, if you like, than Curve was, and it's set out from a different kind of purpose and a different structure from the beginning.
Just to follow, so that with Curve, there was a sort of view that we were partly sharing the risks, though, as we learnt with Curve over time, we were ponying up the money as well as the land, so it seemed to be the risk was more with the council than transfer risk, and that has been an issue quite a lot over the years with lots of projects like PFI, where you're supposed ultimately the council's going to have to take responsibility. So with us being 100% the sole shareholder, effectively everything lies with us, but that's because we're going to be holding the land and the houses at the end of this, regardless of what else is done. Does that risk modelling make a difference in terms of how much money, what the cost of borrowing would be? Because in a sense, we're not transferring risk to someone else, or is that an advantage for us, the fact that we hold on to the risk? So councils are seen as having good revenue streams. We can afford it. What advantages does that give us then?
So the risk relates directly to the reward that we get from these schemes, and there is a risk with all development activity, and the return for that risk is development profit. Now, when the council enters into joint venture partnerships with anybody, it shares that risk, but equally it shares that return. So often development profit can be in the hands of your joint venture partner, who typically, for a council, is a developer. In this instance, the council gets the full benefit of the development profit because it's willing to take the development risk. Equally, as a funder, again, it's the same scenario. If you take on a funding risk, then you need a funding return. Typically, that's a bank that provides that funding, and it charges an interest rate which is commensurate with what it considers the risk to be, and gets the full benefit of that return. In this instance, the council is providing development finance, yes, taking a risk on that to a certain extent, although that risk is securitised against land predominantly. But equally, it gets a full return on that, so the council borrows at significantly lower rates than it lends out at, and it gets a revenue return on that level of risk that it takes on. So, to a certain extent, it's an investment model. The council does take a risk, yes. It's a question of debate, I think, whether that risk is greater than under previous models that it's delivered, because the market is very different. As Councillor Butler mentioned, we don't have another commercial partner to deal with apart from the council, so it's much easier to have certainty about what the commercial structure and output and intentions of the company are going to be. But and it's a really important point, it gets the full value of absolutely everything that it puts into it. So a return on the funding, a return on the development activity itself in the form of development margin, and equally a return in reduced costs. And there are several parts of the report which deal with the way that the company means that the council delivers its own services differently in order to make it less expensive to be able to do so.
Who's got questions? Answered. Okay.
I know there's been lots of questions asked about sites, so I don't want to rehearse that too much. However, as a humble backbencher, I'm still quite confused. I might be reading this wrongly, but on the report today we seem to have 32 sites, and on the website it seems to be 33. I just wonder, how many sites does it actually involve? Just for clarity, and have other sites been considered? And are there other sites in a pipeline, or?
So the number of sites that are public changes as time goes on, because we become further on in the development process of certain sites, and it gets to a point when we engage in a public process, go out to consultation, at which point the sites become public on our own website and our engagement consultant's website, or through published papers like this. There's a process of analysis that we go through before the sites become public, so simply put, we need to make sure that they are viable as development projects before we take them on to that stage. There are lots of sites that we've looked at across the borough to see whether or not they are deliverable and developable and make sense as housing sites. We're still considering some of those, so there are more sites than are currently public. Some or all of the other sites that we've looked at may become public in time, but we're further back in the process in the analysis of those sites to be able to answer that question now. I would anticipate that there'll be another, within the short term, 10 sites, let's say, that will come through the process in this way. maybe in the more medium term, more sites again that will start to flow through. And I would hope over time, as this model becomes a success, that we start to look at other sites across the borough that we can seek to develop in the longer term as well.
I don't want to labour the point. So is there a timescale for when all the initial sites will have been assessed? Because I think one of the concerns of residents is they're not quite sure how many sites there are going to be. Two, can you give me a figure today or of how many sites there are public at present? And what is them? You say it might develop in the future, but do you think that, I don't know how many sites the council owns. I expect it's hundreds. Would you consider if it's successful, it might go into the hundreds in the future?
I wouldn't be able to say that. What I would say is that, the intention, the overall intention and strategic intention behind this is to create more housing and to use the appropriate land that the borough has to be able to do that. So we are looking at sites which we deem to be appropriate. Appropriate means, in planning terms, it's got the possibility within policy terms to create housing there and doesn't create any issues from a technical planning point of view. In development terms, it's got the technical capability to support housing there, and that can be physically housing can be built there, the site can be accessed. It's got a viability matrix that makes sense for it to be able to be developed. So there's a certain set of sites at the moment that have reached that point of analysis and have got beyond the barrier, if you like, to be able to be deemed to be definite sites. As I say, there will be more. It's very hard to put your finger on because the work hasn't yet been done and anything can crop up at any moment, which would mean that a site isn't viable or technically viable for whatever reasons. But with regards to future programme, if this is a success and if this proves to make a return to the council and deliver housing in a more efficient way than the council has been able to do previously, I suppose I would ask a question back to you, why shouldn't it continue on other appropriate sites as long as, and that's an important point, and I'm sure it's the point that you're making, they are actually appropriate sites for development?
Thank you, Chair, and again, thank you, Colm, for presenting. Obviously, I've got a couple of points. First one, obviously, about the consultation. Obviously, I've got to declare that I do work for a rival company, sort of doing a lot of planning consultation. But no, not on this. But obviously, rivals commenting on each other's work. But from my sort of experience in the receiving end of these consultations, obviously, firstly, I appreciate the council's commitment to consult and, again, hopefully driving best practice for when commercial developers are coming into the borough, that the council is showing its intent on this. Obviously, as a councillor, though, from what I found from residents, they're feeling a lot of the information was thin on the ground, and a lot of the sort of consultation material was quite repetitive between the two exhibitions. I'm just wondering if there was any sort of reason for that going in that direction. Was that sort of the choice of was it Newman Francis, I believe? Is there any other sort of reason behind it? Obviously, is that going to be looked at when more sites come forward, other sites enter sort of a second consultation phase? Things like community planning days in certain sites, so we can actually see a mix of approaches. And also, sort of when I was asking some of the Newman reps if once they crunch the data, if they would be able to issue, obviously data protected, where required, the data responses to us as councillors, so we could look at that and sort of have a look ourselves at what the issues are and help identify and help feed back in. And obviously that wasn't proactively given to us when asked for, and I think that was an area that needed a little bit of work again when other sites are going forward. I'll say I am, again, though, quite pleased with the officers at Brick by Brick on this, particularly in my ward. Obviously, we've got one community group that does have concerns over it, and again, appreciate the work that the officers have gone through to actually work with them and engage with them in sort of helping find solutions to it, rather than doing what most commercial developers would do and just simply ignore them and forget them. My other point is sort of drawing on best practice elsewhere in London, most notably two of our neighbouring boroughs, Southwark and Lambeth, obviously have different challenges regarding some of their estate regenerations, largely whole-scale regenerations. Firstly, as brick by brick moves down the pipeline, as our housing stock gets older, and best use of land changes, are we looking towards those potential whole-scale redevelopment projects in time? Would that be through brick by brick? Would it be through other means, as Southwark and Lambeth have taken? And are we taking any lessons from what those other authorities are doing? Obviously, we've seen Lambeth have had massive issues with Cressingham, Southwark have had massive issues with Aylesbury, and how are we going to make sure that we don't have those issues here and we do things properly and learn from what's been done elsewhere?
Taking the first question first. So, with regards to Newman Francis programme and how the consultation process has gone, I'd be the first to admit, I think, that in the early stages of that, we had to do a lot of work with Newman Francis to work out exactly how they were, for example, publicising public meetings. For example, we set a 50-metre radius around the sites to be able to deliver letters to people to let them know that there was meetings on. Sometimes that stopped not the whole way down an estate, for example, so it didn't necessarily make sense. And quite quickly, we kind of worked with Newman Francis to make sure that they were taking a sensible approach to that rather than an absolute approach to what we were telling them to do. But we did try with them to do different types of meetings to be able to capture different kinds of people. So we did evening meetings, and we extended that as the process went on to be later, capture more people who were coming home from work. We did weekend meetings. Some meetings were in, rugby clubs or community centres somewhere outside in the estate itself under a gazebo, so you'd get passing trade. So we mixed it up a bit as much as possible. And equally, the intention was very much to gather feedback first of all, and those sessions varied in the number of people attending and the type of feedback that we got. Consider that, make changes to the scheme, and then present back those changes to the community and gather more feedback at that stage to feed ultimately into the planning applications themselves. So I suppose the other point to note is that this is all pre-planning application consultation and engagement at this stage. There is a further process now once we submit planning applications where people can formally respond through that process as well. I'll be absolutely happy for them to feed back the data analysis to local ward members on how those sessions went and what we determined from those and how the schemes changed. I think that would be a really useful process actually, so I'll make sure that they do that. With regards to comparisons with more whole-scale schemes maybe that others are undertaking across London in terms of estate regeneration, it's not the intention of this programme in any way to undertake that type of programme. It's very much focused on infill. It's very much focused on sites that are readily available for development now. And it's very much focused, if you like, in that regard on delivering housing units quickly. I think those larger schemes, A, it's a policy decision of the council as to whether or not it undertakes them. And B, they take much longer and much more difficult in nature. And I suppose I would point out to the committee recent decisions on things like Aylesbury, which would make you consider an overarching programme like that and the complexity and the time it would take to deliver it. So it's not the intention at all of this programme to do that type of estate regeneration. This is infill regeneration on sites that are readily available for development now.
Also point out that at Cabinet yesterday we considered, it was where we sent up our recommendations from the call-in, which I think is going to be considered for review by your people, which was effectively about learning lessons from the residents' consultation. So that has been an issue that was flagged up at the call-in in July, and obviously we can re-emphasise the need as a conclusion or as a recommendation that we need to learn lessons, and secondly, I would say that both communities and councillors need to be kept actively engaged in any of the process, because I think at the beginning sometimes the meetings were sort of at strange times and may have been very appropriate for those residents. But now that we're into the second and third reiterations of the plans, I hopefully that there will be some updates to local councillors, which I'm sure, unless of course it has been sent out, but I don't think I've noticed my one. But I don't know what it could be quite a while before changes, if any, get circulated again.
I don't think it'll be quite a while before changes get circulated. Certainly before. So the intention was always, prior to going out locally, we informed local ward members of what the process was going to be. And then we undertook that process, which, as you say, had meetings at various different times to be able to suit residents. I think what we absolutely need to do now, touching on a point of Councillor Mann, is feedback on all of those sessions to local ward councillors again to say this is what we found. You know, have you any further comments on that? And through the planning process, continue on a process of engagement with local ward councillors to make sure that it doesn't just go away now that we've finished that particular element of the consultation. Future phases, I think we have definitely learned lessons from the consultation process that we've undertaken, about timings, about what residents like with regards to engagement processes and how they feel more comfortable in engaging in processes like that. Equally, we've learned lessons from how ward members were engaged, so we will implement that in the next stages. Because
councillors are almost as strange and as different as the communities they represent. But you don't need to comment on that one. Talking of councillors, Donald.
Thank you. Is it not the case that this model, brick by brick, is really moving taxpayers' money around from pocket to pocket to pocket, paying out fees, etc., paying itself fees, and the only time that money comes in is when units are sold. And then you have to offset all the fees that have been paid, all the expenditure of council taxpayers' money against the income from the sale of property.
It is true that the value from any property development activity on these sites comes from the sale of units on the sites, whether they be private units or whether they be affordable units. But that's the case with all property development activity, and I would, I suppose, argue that the way that investment goes into these schemes is a far more efficient way of investing in property development than perhaps councils have done previously, because there isn't the opportunity for value to leak out of the system in the same way. You're not paying extra value to anybody else, for example, banks or developers. The council gets the benefit of the land value that comes in from the scheme. It gets the benefit from the value of money that comes into the scheme for debt, and it gets the value, 100% of the value of the development profit that comes into the scheme. It can then reinvest that money in future phases of any development activity, which makes the whole thing more efficient. So it is true, you're absolutely right, that the value comes in at the end of the scheme from sales, and that raises a question as to whether or not that's a risky activity, I suppose, and property development is risky. But as is most investment activity that any council would undertake, there's a risk which is commensurate with the reward. Now, looking at all asset classes over time, over the last 30 years or so, in terms of returns, property has always been amongst the highest of the returns in asset classes in terms of what you can invest in. And in the UK, over the course of the last 30 years or so, that's returned an annualised rate of about 7%. And equally, it's a much more flatter and standard curve than other forms of investment activity, for example, equities, which can go up and down quite significantly. So I think, you know, in this model, we are making a very strong statement of support in the property market in Croydon. You know, we believe that we will be able to sell these units once they're built. But values in Croydon are changing quite significantly, and I suppose it's the council that will benefit in the event that they continue to change in the way that we think they will, which is in an upward trajectory. The council will benefit wholly, rather than other development actors benefiting wholly.
Just add something to that, because I think the other side of this, and certainly Colm's touched on all the around the business. But I think when we've spoken earlier about my portfolio, and in fact the last paper that we looked at was about housing allocations, and at the heart of this is not only the profit that's going to be returned to the council, it's going to deliver 50% affordable housing, and that's not being delivered elsewhere. And it's clear from what's going on in Croydon that if the council doesn't step forward and deliver these houses, we're going to be in a worse crisis, and financially in a worse crisis because of the cost of people in temporary and emergency accommodation. So that's also another factor to be taken into account. And also the housing needs of the people who live in Croydon.
Except that at the end, the properties are an asset if we should buy them. There's no doubt about that. They're an asset. And in the normal circumstances, that would always be so. The alternative, of course, is the traditional method, is you engage a contractor to develop your sites.
Yes, and that is a traditional method, but they cream off money left, right and centre, traditional ones. The classic one is to overprice materials so that you... so there's lots of things you can do as a private contractor working for the council, building or just maintaining, that you can hide your profits. And this way, at least, there are still some private contractors in the mix. And I've got a question later on 2.15, which I'll come back to. But the reality is, I think what Alison's saying is that with the withdrawal of grant funding of either council or housing association housing, affordable housing is only being funded out of the profit made from the selling of properties. There's very little. I mean, rental streams can be useful, but they're a limited resource. So what? I'm conscious of the time. It's 9 o'clock. I've got 2 or 3 people's names on the list. I just want to make certain that we're not going to go over old ground. So I had Stephen, Ollie and Patricia. But Patricia first.
Can I make a suggestion that, yes, if we've got an allocation of time, if we're aware of it, then I presume that we'll all be fairly conscious of that and make our questions, obviously, to the point. Questions to the point.
To the point.
And it is... you talk about the land being readily available. Around the borough, there are a number of sites that are owned by private individuals. Have they yet to be approached about the sort of thing that you're doing? That's one. In terms of scrutiny, to what extent are we able to scrutinise the company brick by brick? Example, the contractors that brick by brick are going to be using. Will we have any sense of being able to question who's been used? Will we be able to actually see the accounts and that sort of thing? Really, it's a question that's been asked, obviously, by many individuals. So at the end of the day, let's get it out to the open and find out.
With regards to the private owners, absolutely. As people come and approach the council to sell their land or to look at perhaps developing their land, we would consider that, as well as council-owned land as well. In particular, this is coming up with land that's immediately adjacent to brick-by-brick sites, so where perhaps there's an access which is created by somebody else's land or by our land into their site, and we have got live discussions underway with some people in that regard. With regards to scrutinising brick by brick, there's a section at the end of the report, but the key thing to bear in mind is the council is the sole shareholder and therefore has shareholder rights over this company, which is a whole series of statutory rights laid out in the Memorandum and Articles of Association of the company, which give the council very significant levels of control over what the company does. Part of that shareholder right is to approve the business plan, and the business plan lays out exactly what the company does on an annual basis, which is approved by the shareholder. There are various other ways that the company can be scrutinised laid out within the report. Specifically on your point about what contractors we use, etc., all of that will be contained within the business plan, but it's very much the intention of brick by brick to use best practice, as we've seen it delivered elsewhere across the council in terms of using local labour, signing up to the Croydon Charter, the emerging Croydon Charter, dealing very directly with things like Croydon Works, which is the employment brokerage service that the council has set up. So by virtue of the fact that it has emerged from these buildings and the council is the sole shareholder, it would be expected to have the absolute, best delivery with regards to local labour and local benefit, and that's very much the intention of Brick by Brick Board as well.
Thank you again, Chair, and obviously thank you very much, Colin, for your answer previously. Obviously, I was speaking of my own personal experience. I'm pleased to hear what else has been going on around this. Very much a question in the same vein. We've got that data, that experience of consulting ourselves as an authority, as Brick by Brick, as a developer in these areas. Are we looking to plough that data, particularly around some of these communities, back into the local authority, SCI? I know it's primarily advisory for developers, but as we've got that, is there an opportunity for us to then use that to promote best practice for consultation within these different communities, so that Brick by Brick is leading by example to drive up the practice across all developments in the borough?
We are, absolutely. So every consultation process that we've undertaken develops an SCI, a statement of community involvement, for that particular planning application. All of those become public as part of the planning applications that we put in, so all of that information will be available through the planning applications anyway. Equally, the consultation process has very much been a joint effort between Brick by Brick and its engagement consultants, Newman Francis, and the Regeneration and District Centres team of the Council. So we very much stood side by side in those processes, and all of that activity has fed back into the Council in as much as it's fed back into Brick by Brick. So yes, we'll be using everything that we've learned from that to feed into other processes that we've got underway, things like local consultation about parks, where those types of comments and queries have come up from local residents. They've been fed back into the Council processes as well, and local residents can expect to get answers from that as much as they get answers from Brick by Brick on the development.
Okay, just a couple of points to clarify. Sorry, Oliver, I just realised I'd forgotten about you.
Thank you, Chair. Please forgive me if I've missed anything. I was out for a little bit of this item. So just 3 quick questions. I'm sorry if I'm recapping old ground. You talked about rising land values, Colm. Would there ever be a temptation to sit on land and defer development to get greater value in the future? Would there be scope now or in the future to mix up the type of tenancy that properties are intended for? So would Brick by Brick ever act as a landlord, or as to rent properties out? And will Brick by Brick, or is it possible that Brick by Brick could develop land that it doesn't currently own?
So on that last point, that was one that was asked earlier, and yes, it can, and it would consider doing so if it made commercial sense to do so. So, for example, if you've got an adjacent site, privately owned, and it would make sense to bring them together and develop out both sites together, which would create greater capacity and greater value, then it's absolutely something that we would consider, and there's nothing that prevents us from doing so in the corporate structure of the company. With regards to sitting on land, absolutely not. The model doesn't make sense to sit on land by virtue of the fact that we need to develop it and get the value back in from that in order to be able to reinvest that money in future phases of the programme. So I suppose part of the shareholder aspiration of this company will be that we use it to actually develop land and housing quickly, not to act as a simple kind of value enhancement property development company. We've got enough of those already. So it doesn't make sense to sit on land under this particular structure. In terms of mixing up the tenancies and whether or not in particular we may go with PRS or private rented sector type units, it's not currently in the programme, but that's not to say that it wouldn't be. I think it always needs to be an option that in the event that sales values weren't what we expected them to be, that we could instead rent out the properties and gain a revenue line in that way, and that could essentially service the money that we've put into the property. Equally, some of the sites that we are still looking at in terms of development capacity and that are further back in the process are in the metropolitan centre, and it may be that it makes perfect sense for those to be rented sites rather than private for sale sites, in particular when you factor in other schemes which are coming forward by other developers which may hit the market at the same time. So it's not the intention at the moment, and in fact it doesn't exist in the programme at the moment, but it may be in future depending on where the values sit at the point that the units are completed.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that we must always consider the residents that are living here now. I know that people do need to be housed, and there, we have huge waiting list and everything else, but we are part of a city of 8 million people, and with many other boroughs who all have spaces where people can live as well. And I think we must always be considering that it's residents that are here, that are committed to it, that have lived here for some of them all of their lives or for a very long time, and things, who are really committed to Croydon, and that how they feel and their views and things must really be taken into consideration. And I think that there was a lot of hurt and concern because the consultation process certainly didn't get off to a very good start, and people did feel that they didn't hear of it in time, and councillors didn't hear to help support them, and all those sorts of things that we've gone over before, so we don't need to. But it is really important that local residents, who are after all the taxpayers here as well, that they are involved all the way through, and that how they feel and what they want and things as well is really taken very seriously indeed, especially if they are living very close to where any of the developments are made. Thank you.
I think one of the main points on that is, and we've talked about housing need this evening, both from allocations and on the basis of local plan, which sets out our housing need, that the majority of the housing need in this borough is for the sons and daughters of this borough. It actually is Croydon residents that require the housing need and the homes that we're building. But one of the things that we have ensured is that we will have local lettings plans on all these new developments, and we're also looking at ways that we can have local sales plans, local shared ownership plans. That means the people living closest to the developments, particularly on our estates, but in a wider area on perhaps some of the smaller developments, will get the first opportunity to actually bid to come and live in these homes and have the priority. And where they actually are our tenants, that means they then vacate properties that will be available for others. So we're very keen in that way that local lettings are essential on these developments, and also looking at other things that need improving on the estates. And we haven't got huge amounts of money, but certainly redesign around a number of things that need redoing on estates, that part of the scheme coming forward, we can take that into account and actually improve an environment people are living in. And I think one of the things that we haven't touched so much on that is the way that we've brought this forward with teams of architects that are actually looking at very good quality design, so that the new homes that are going to be close to you will actually increase your area, make it a better place to be.
Could we see the evidence on scrutiny so that we know that it is happening, and it's local people here that are, and that would please everyone so much, I really do think, and people would be much more accepting of it then.
If you want to respond, I would be absolutely happy to do that, and in particular to give a paper on exactly how that's going to pan out as the sites start to get developed, and what the local lettings policy and local sales policy is going to look like.
I mean, if we are delivering 1,000 homes, so, it's something that I think the committee, as a conclusion, would probably do want to be kept up to date on this. I just want to point out on 2.15 that design is important, right? But my experience in working in housing for the last 20 years is that the technical spec and the use of materials are probably even more important for how how successful a building is. And when I say, when I see the word market leading, I think of, say, for lifts, that, you know, you can buy market-leading lifts, but the only people who can maintain it is the market leader. So Schindler and the Otis of the world will have a closed system, and you'll get a slightly cheaper lift for, you know, you think you're getting great quality, and then you have to only go to Schindler, really, who can maintain it. Or if they go for someone else, they have to pay Schindler loads of money. For me, I think there's a whole issue, because how many of us have been to council estates where they've had to replace front doors because they just weren't good enough, robust enough? And how many have been to schemes where communal lighting and other things have had to be overhauled? And even on new build schemes, you'll see that the secure by design principles have ended up with letterbox on the outside of the building that are all half broken. So we just want to make, as I said, it'd be good to see that the members level steering group on 2.23, which should be chaired by the cabinet members for homes regeneration planning, should always take, I would recommend, a sceptical approach to the new in terms of buildings, because lessons shows me that if something is new and innovative, normally you're the one who's going to have to then 3 years down the line fix it. So please do not. I mean, architects are lovely people, and some people here have probably been are being persuaded by architects in the past. But as I said, we should always look to the mechanical and engineers as well. They have a lot more. If they had a greater say in the buildings, I'm sure there'll be less problems.
If I could respond on that, Chair. I share all of your concerns about that, and I think that's absolutely right. It is absolutely important that we get that right. I would say that we've chosen the architects very carefully to be not someone who's going to create, you know, the world's craziest and most interesting looking scheme, but these are practices who have delivered good quality London infill schemes which have stood the test of time, which have been able to be delivered in a cost efficient way. And I suppose my other main point on that would be, touching on one of Councillor Mann's points earlier, we're in an enviable position here to be able to learn from processes which have happened before. And this is a company that's been set up by a council, and a council that's got a huge amount of experience of managing an estate which, you know, has had issues and problems and things that we've had to repair and replace over time. So we're working very closely with responsive repairs teams and the rest of the housing teams to find out from them what's worked and what hasn't, and to make sure that that gets fed into all of these schemes as a specification. So it's I suppose what I would say is it's a practical set of proposals, and a real set of proposals that we can deliver in a cost-efficient way. It's not trying to break the world record of craziest architectural designs. It's very much a practical process that we want to make sure we can stand the test of time.
I mean, the other way is don't build cheap, right? Because it's more expensive longer-term maintenance. That's the other point I would strongly make. In terms of conclusion and recommendations, I'm not certain there's much in the way of recommendations from this, because this really was a report that would allow people to understand what was going on brick by brick. And also some of those issues that I think have been raised here have been raised under the call-in. But I certainly have got the very strong impression from all councillors here that we do want active engagement of local councillors and communities, and that we'd like to have an ongoing conversation because this is going to be a number of years. And I'm certainly would be very keen further down the line. It may be in 2 or 3 years' time, but I would hope that the scrutiny committee would probably go around and look at some of the sites that are being delivered, so that we can actually see the reality versus, in a sense, what we've been told today. But I'd like to thank you very much, because, as I said, I think on this item, you're always coming in at the very end, aren't you, Andy? Yeah, but that's okay, because we are talking about conclusion and recommendation.
I wanted to just suggest a conclusion or recommendation. I think the key problem here is concern by residents, sometimes about things that are happening and sometimes things that aren't happening. And it's about improving the consultation process. And I know that's been brought up before, but I think if there can be some reassurance for residents about where sites are in the process. And what I'm asking is that you go away and review how you can report what sites are definitely in the process, what sites are in the pipeline, and then potential sites for the future, so people can be clearer publicly about what sites are in and out.
And actually, I think there in some cases, there may be sites that we have said that are never going to be developed, and maybe we should just tell those residents, because some people are... It's probably those sites that you could put, I don't know. But if you can take that on board and maybe see whether, if we can say to people, your site is not going to be developed because of this or that, or it's not going to be looked at for a number of years, I'm sure a lot of people would then would be reassured. All right. Otherwise, can I just bring this item to a close and thank you for the officers and the Cabinet member for coming along tonight. We've just got to do the work programme aspect of the paper, and it's an opportunity for people to review the work programme. I should point out that I have met with Stephen, who's recently taken over as the Head of Democratic Services and Scrutiny, but I also met with Joe Negrini, who was the Executive Director responsible for this, for PLACE, which this committee sort of covers. She's now the Chief Exec. We've kept the work programme post-Christmas reasonably light, because we are doing a sort of a quick review about whether we can be better at doing pre-decision scrutiny. So we get to see papers ahead of Cabinet rather than after Cabinet, and so that we're all working together to improve the overall function of the Council. I hopefully to have some more information feeding back. Obviously, there are many other issues people have, but there's a list there. You can always come and suggest an item for the agenda at any time, rather than just here. So, is there anything anyone wants to add in terms of the Streets and Environment work programme as onto the long list? If not, I will close that item. I'm not... Oh.
Sorry, always me. Just... two quick ones. I know we're seeing a lot on Tramlink in terms of Sutton extension. I'm wondering if it's an opportunity to review the Trams 2030 paper about the wider Tramlink network, and also looking at what's going on in other London boroughs. Camden and Lambeth are both doing quite a lot on air quality, and I'm wondering if it's something that we might want to look at as a scrutiny committee about air quality in the borough.
Those are two issues. So air quality is something that the Mayor of London is going to be doing on a London basis, and obviously Corinne's got to respond. So my understanding is that the Council had already started work, but will be going on to do that work. But that certainly we can make that more formal, so that we at least we can get there. The issue about the trams was actually one of the questions I was thinking about asking this evening, but when Alison said that she doesn't do trams really. Well, I just think, as I said, that over the last 10 years, the previous Mayor of London didn't seem to be that interested in extending the tram network, and I just think fundamentally it's one of the cheapest systems to expand, and we should be really pushing for it much more heavily. But we can look at that as well then, okay? At least think about whether we can get it into the programme.
So, obviously noticing Southern in there, which is something I know I've and fellow commuters have pushed quite regularly. Last couple of times they've managed to get away with not coming, and I'm wondering if that might be a potential alternative to slot in at that sort of point.
As I said, any item that goes on, it's all about effectiveness, and the reason we have honed into issues that we believe that we can influence, which is like accessibility to train stations. Other councils have done scrutiny reviews of Southern's performance, and it hasn't made any difference to them, apart from making the point that it's terrible. And I think that point has already been made by 100 times by everyone else. If that carries on and there are specific issues, there is the... we won't be able to review it because just of the timing, but I would urge people to look at the Govia's proposed timetable changes, which may not be the most exciting document, but I'm not very happy about it, because it takes away my final train that gets me to Elephant and Castle in the morning. So I'm going to be sort of... and there's a number of people who get on that train who links are being taken away by these changes. And so I would urge people to look at the Govia travel ones because there are no events, consultation events in the Croydon area. They're all in places like Redhill and at London Bridge. And again, that may be something that we may want to take the Cabinet member responsible to take that up with Govia Southern Rail about why are they changing services over the next few years and not having consultation events in the local area. But that's only just come out in the last week, so it couldn't make this agenda, and it's too late for the next one. But I'm sure Stuart and if Alison has a role, they will take those issues up if we send them our comments. So altogether, I would suggest that we are closing item 8. Item 9 is not applicable, so the meeting is ended.